Hey guys, welcome to Eat, Sleep, Sing, Repeat podcast. This week I have a really interesting one for you. So I'll be talking to Sarah Grace about synesthesia. I came across Sarah on TikTok of all places. And she was basically breaking down different popular songs off the radio and describing the colours that she sees when she hears these songs. And I realised that there's a lot more to synesthesia than I first thought. So it isn't just seeing colours when you listen to music. There's a lot more to it. So in the podcast, we chat about that. We chat about what synesthesia is, different artists that have synesthesia and that who use it in their songwriting, and what it was like growing up with synesthesia. I really enjoyed chatting to Sarah about this topic, and I thought it would be a really interesting one to share with you guys. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next time.
So my background is actually in speech and language pathology. So I have my graduate degree. Yeah. So for a while I worked in the hospitals. I mainly worked with brain injury patients. And that's just because I love communication. It was really fun. But recently I started doing my art a little more full time. So I put in my resignation for my speech pathology job right before the pandemic hit, actually, and then worked in some nonprofits. I do some directing of children's theaters. So I did some artistic staff work. And then, yeah, I'd say right now my art is like 50% of my time. And then the rest of is nonprofit work.
That's so interesting. And like, I am part of this organization called Vocology in Practice. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
I've heard of it.
But there's a lot of like Americans and Canadians and people from all over the world. Whereabouts are you actually?
I'm in the US in Minnesota. So
in Minnesota, okay.
Basically in Canada, super north.
Okay. But yeah, so there's a lot of people from all over the world in the organization, but it's like basically an organization for voice professionals. So it's like a lot of SLPs, laryngologists and all that kind of thing, and like vocal coaches and singing teachers and all of that as well, coming together to like learn about the voice and the mechanics of the voice, anatomy and voice science and all that stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting.
That's amazing. And you're a member of that?
I'm not an official member yet, but I've been training with them for the last 6 months, and I'm just about to like sit like an assessment thing, so then I should be able to get my little logo thing to say that I'm certified and all of that. So yeah, but it's just interesting that that's what your job was, because obviously I have you on to talk about synesthesia and kind of relating that into music and singing, but then the SLT thing is also very tuned in with that as well. And do you think your knowledge of the voice with SLT and the synesthesia link in any way?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I think that maybe my synesthesia, I love listening to people talk. I love voices because it's obviously like an auditory experience, but it's also a really sensory experience for me because there are often, colors and textures as well. So I think probably part of that is why I moved into a profession where it's just listening to people talk all day and helping them with their voice. And a little bit of what I did when I first started working was vocal health. So I worked with some singers and performers. And I think my synesthesia maybe helped a little bit with picking up like slight nuances in the voice, little areas where maybe they were straining, and just had a little clearer picture of that. Yeah, that's an interesting question, though. I don't know. Does that answer that question?
Oh, yeah, it definitely does. And I know you probably, if you hadn't thought about it before, but I was just thinking, because I suppose I was curious about how synesthesia like works with like your already known knowledge, like say like the stuff with your SLP. So like, and like if other people with synesthesia would see the same colors, listen to the same voice, and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So from what I understand, so basically it was just this past year that I started meeting other people with synesthesia, and that was through TikTok. And even though I've had it my whole life, I've never really done a lot of research on the topic myself, but I've done a bunch in the last year because of the platform and also just to answer some of my own questions. And so I think I assumed that other people with synesthesia saw the same colors that I saw. So like there was a B flat we would all see the same color. But I guess according to research, that isn't the case. So it's really variable depending on the synesthete. There are general trends. So the majority of synesthetes with my type, when there are high notes, they see bright or like light colors in general, and then low notes are darker in color, and that's how it is for me. But there's a bunch of variation. So that's one of the interesting things about it.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of, I can't remember where, I've heard this a couple of times over the years at different workshops and organizations about, if you think of like, I don't know, like a bitter taste, usually people relate like a brighter color with a bitter taste.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Or like, I don't know, like I suppose maybe like like cold we relate with blue. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like there's certain things that like the general consensus will be the same. So I wonder, like, is synesthesia kind of an extension of that kind of multisensory understanding of the world around us?
Yeah, I mean, what I understand from what I've read in the scientific papers, it definitely is and can be, because, so I was thinking about in the music world, there are all of these descriptors to describe different sounds. As a singer's voice can be bright sounding, there can be a dark quality. People talk about rough vocal sounds, smooth vocal sounds. So it seems like throughout the language, in multiple languages, there are descriptors that are very sensory related to different things, like you were talking about, like taste. And so I suspect that part of that, so synesthesia is more common than people think. It's not taught about very often, but most research says 2 to 4% of the entire world has some form of synesthesia or another. So yeah, I wonder if a lot of those descriptors maybe come from people who have synesthesia who don't know it. And also, all synesthesia is an integration of different sensory experiences. So everybody has the capability to sort of link some sensory experiences to different degrees. So yeah, I think that definitely could be from that, for sure.
Yeah, because I think when I messaged you first, I had mentioned that, like, after kind of discovering your page on TikTok, I had a memory of when I was in, like, I think I was in first year of my secondary school, so I was around 13. And I remember being in my music class, and I don't remember the exact question, but I think he was asking us to describe the music in some way, and I actually described it to him in colour. And I remember him being quite, like, fascinated by that, and I think he might have mentioned synesthesia. I don't know if I made that bit up, but I didn't know what synesthesia was at the time anyway. And I wonder, like, did I have synesthesia, or was that just, I don't know, just what I decided to use as a descriptor then? Or is it because I didn't nurture it and it kind of disappeared? So can you lose it?
I've heard of that happening. So do you ever have experiences where you hear sound and then there's like a color association, or?
Not really. It's not, and maybe sometimes, but like it's not really like a regular thing. I wouldn't have kind of said I had synesthesia or anything, anymore anyway.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder, I have spoken to some people with synesthesia who say they had it really early on in their childhood and then it faded as they got older. And they have a bunch of theories about why that may have happened. But yeah, I wonder. It's possible for sure.
And when did you first realize that you were a synesthesic?
Yeah.
What's the term?
Is maybe the term. I'm still learning the terms.
Yeah.
So it's biological in my case. It's in one side of my family. And so I remember really early on in my childhood telling friends and telling my parents that I saw colors and textures with sound. And I was a pretty imaginative child. I did a lot of theater and just was making up stories. So the reaction I got was usually like a chuckle, like I was joking, or like kind of like an eye roll, like I was being imaginative. And then I just didn't talk about it much for the rest of my childhood. And I guess this is a common experience with a lot of synesthetes, that they, early in their childhood, because of the responses they see, somehow in their little minds, they realize, okay, this is something that is maybe different, so I shouldn't talk about it. So I didn't for most of my childhood. And then in graduate school and undergrad, I was a psychology minor. And then my primary research focus was, as I mentioned, brain injury research. So I worked with a lot of neuroscientists, and I felt comfortable mentioning to them, hey, I've had this experience my whole life. It's really like automatic. It's always the same. If I'm listening to the same sound, is this like, what is this? And that's where I got some confirmation that, oh no, that's synesthesia if it's automatic and consistent. And I remember specifically being in a psychology lecturable class with 300 students, and they were teaching about synesthesia. And I just remember my palms getting really sweaty and feeling really anxious because I realized, oh, there is a word to this thing that I had my whole life. And I never knew what it was called. So yeah, that's sort of a lot of synesthetes are adults before they get confirmation about what they have, which is interesting. Yeah.
It makes sense though, I guess, because I mean, if you have always kind of navigated your way through life, you know, and experienced different senses in that way, you don't really talk about like senses with people as you're going. It's not really, you know, it might come up, but it doesn't really. So I can completely understand how you would never realize that other people don't see things the same way as you do.
Totally. And I think because it's so normal for a lot of people with synesthesia, it's just part of their life experience. They might have a suspicion that maybe everybody experiences things the same way that they do. So I know for me, even though I didn't talk about it much as a kid, I still sort of felt like, well, most people must see something with sounds. And so even recently with our TikTok page, I've done some painting and shown my husband some of my paintings. And there was one recently where I painted a bossa nova piece, and I showed it to him and I said, this must be a really boring painting because obviously this is what this looks like. Like everybody will think that this is what this looks like. So it's not very interesting. And he was like, no, I don't see that when I hear music. So I'm still having moments like that where I'm realizing that. But
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned about your painting. So you, just for people who are listening, you actually paint what you see when you listen to music and you paint the songs essentially.
Yeah.
So when did you first have that idea, and yeah, how's it going?
So I've actually been doing that since I was a kid. I had a nice little art set up in my room, and I would go lock myself in my room and put on my Walkman, and which like dates how old I am, and then paint what I saw. And I've been doing that throughout my life, just sort of like therapeutically for myself, because like you might understand as a creative person, it's when you have an idea or just something creative inside of you, it just feels really nice to get it out on paper sometimes, or to express yourself that way. So that's what I've done for a while. And then slowly, sort of by word of mouth, people found out about what I was doing and said they were interested. And then there's been some increasing demand. So now I have a bit of a business and a website, and I set things up that way, and soon I'll be shipping all over the world. So yeah, it's just been a natural thing for me that has helped.
That's amazing. It's such a good idea. I was mentioning it to a friend of mine, and she was like, oh my God, it's such a nice idea for a present for someone. Like, you know, if there was a song that they liked, you could get the song painted and give it to them as a present. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, it is. It's so, it just adds another layer of meaning to a gift, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's really, I feel really like honored, because sometimes another thing that people have been doing recently is they'll share audio clips of maybe a voicemail that was from a loved one who is no longer with us. And that is, a very heavy thing to be entrusted with. And they'll ask me to paint their voice. And so, yeah, so that's a thing that's another aspect of what I'm doing right now too. Less of that. It's usually music that I paint, but sometimes it's voices. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Like, it's such a lovely idea, but I suppose it's like, yeah, I was speaking to an artist actually from my local town who was saying that she was getting some commissions as well for like pets that have died. I don't know if she said it, if there was humans too, but definitely pets that have passed away. And she was like painting, it was like sketches and paintings and stuff. So you're like doing that, but with your paintings for synesthesia.
Yeah, exactly. So does she have synesthesia, or she was painting like images of?
No. She, not that I know of anyway. I think she like did art when she was really young, and she like dropped out of college. She didn't like the whole college thing. Yeah. And she's just getting back in it now with lockdown and everything, a lot of people are kind of going back to their old ways and their roots, which I think is really nice.
Yeah, that's been an interesting benefit of the pandemic, it seems. It's lots of tragedy, but it seems like a lot of people also have had time to sort of reflect on what they want in their life and spend time with themselves. And
yeah. And you mentioned as well that you actually perform and do a bit of singing yourself.
Yeah, I haven't for a bit, but growing up, I did a lot of performing I live in the Twin Cities, the Minneapolis area, and it has a lot of theaters. I think it's in the US, it's like the second per capita has the most theaters anywhere besides New York City, which you wouldn't think when you think of Minnesota. But so yeah, I did a lot of performing growing up. I did a lot of vocal performance as well. I started out in college for vocal performance and theater performance, and then I changed majors to speech pathology, partially because I heard the rumors that you can't make money as an artist, and so I got really afraid. And but in hindsight, I wish I had kept with it, because I think there's plenty of ways to make money as an artist and make a living.
Yeah. But I mean, you can always go back to it. It's one of those things that, I think there's a lot of people actually who have gone into like the medical side of things and who are also have some kind of performing background. And there's actually a woman called Lynn Hilton. Do you know Lynn Hilton?
I don't, no.
She, I think she was a nurse. And then she went into learning about like the voice, and now she coaches and she uses like her medical background to help her in her coaching. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting. Those two worlds seem to collide quite a bit, or kind of work together quite a bit. Yeah. And when you were singing, did seeing the songs in colour help you learn the songs, or how did it kind of affect the way you kind of navigated that?
Yeah. So I was in choirs, and then I would do like small show choirs all the way growing up into my early adulthood. And I think the big thing for me is that, so when I listen to music, I've learned a lot of strategies to not be overwhelmed by the visuals and the sensory experience. But when I'm singing and I'm in a group of other people singing, I don't really have to worry about that so much. And I can just sort of like, let myself be fully immersed in the sound and the visuals. So I think I never thought about that question, but maybe it did kind of help me. Just having that extra sensory piece probably did help me with memorization of the music. And then for my acting, it was very helpful, because it's not hard for me to get emotional when I hear music. And so I could sort of use that to my advantage in performance. But
yeah. It's interesting, because I was just thinking, like, I'm very much like a visual person myself, and if I'm learning lyrics off, I'll always like write them out in like different coloured pens. Like I'll have, like if like the verses melodies are the same, I'll have the verses blue, and then I might have the chorus pink, and so it's just like more visual for me in my mind, or I might highlight them or whatever. So I think the synesthesia that you have kind of marks that for you in your mind almost.
That's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, that could be. And it's so interesting so when you're writing out, have you always done that, where you write out in different colors?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. And I think a few years ago I did a course. It was like teaching music to dyslexics, and it went through a lot of multisensory stuff. And it kind of made me realize again that like learning with color, like I use a lot of colorful flashcards and highlighters and things like that, really helps me memorize what I'm learning. Yeah.
Oh, that's so great. We have so much to talk about. I worked with kids with dyslexia as well. So that's so...
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's such a great point, because like the human mind, it's been proven scientifically that we learn so much better when there's multisensory experiences happening. And so, for you to do that with the kids you were working with, I'm sure you like benefited them in a major way. And then also it seems like you've just had an inherent knowledge yourself of how to help yourself learn by incorporating different colors and in your music. So yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just think that, like everyone's mind is different. Everyone works differently. So the more tools you have to help them kind of understand what you're trying to teach them, the better. So
yeah, for sure. I agree.
And you mentioned as well about how like knowledge of synesthesia could be useful in educational settings. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was growing up, and it's maybe a little different now, but so a lot of synesthetes with my type of synesthesia have a really intense auditory sensitivity. It's just kind of hard to focus if there's sound going on because you have the auditory stimulation and the colors. So when I was going through school, I had a lot of difficulty focusing at very specific moments of the school day. It was when music was playing, if the teacher played music during work time, or if there were kids chattering. And so my teachers weren't aware of synesthesia. They hadn't heard of that before. So I got tested for everything under the sun. I was tested for autism, ADHD, a few different things I know, and they all came back negative. And so my teachers didn't know what to do with me. And so my parents had to fight really hard since I didn't have a diagnosis because I wasn't being tested for the right thing to get me accommodations in school. And so the thing I ended up being able to do is to leave the classroom if there was a test. And that really helped me. But, it took a few years to figure that out. And a lot of kids, I speak to a lot of people who are adults now who talk about their experiences in the schools growing up as synesthetes. And I was never bullied, but a lot of kids have been bullied because they talk about their synesthesia, not realizing that it's a little more on the rare side, and then kids make fun of them, or they have horrible learning experiences when really it would just take a couple tweaks in how their teachers work with them, and like some extra things that they could do to help them. So I think it would be incredible if just very briefly in schools, first of all, for teachers to be aware of synesthesia and sort of how it might affect kids that are trying to learn. But secondly, to teach kids in the classroom to maybe have a short minute talking about synesthesia. So the next generation of kids goes up as an adult and knows what it is. So they're not, so there's less opportunities for bullying because they'll know what it is.
That's so interesting that, so you said you were tested for autism and ADHD. So obviously was it disrupting you to a certain extent in school?
Yes, it was very specific. So it was, like I mentioned, our teachers, I don't know if your teachers were like this, but during work time, they would play music, and we'd have to get a math worksheet done or something. And the whole time, especially in primary school, I would just be absorbed in the sound and the colors that I saw, and I would lose track of time and not a single thing would get done on that worksheet. And same was true for if we were doing like group project stuff, it would be really hard for me to focus with the sounds of kids chattering. But if there was no sound, I would test very well, I would learn very well. And so there was this sort of inconsistent pattern that the teachers couldn't figure out. Lo and behold, no synesthesia all along.
Oh my God. Wow. And so what age were you when you found out that that's what it was that was causing those challenges for you?
I was diagnosed with auditory sensitivity. That was the furthest thing they were able to figure out when I was a kid. And so really not in my childhood at all did I have probably proper accommodations for synesthesia. I was 22 before I had the answer for what it was. So that's a long period of time to not know. And I think what ended up happening is I just came up with strategies myself as I got older to deal with the auditory hypersensitivity that I had. But it would have been great if earlier on an adult could have taught me some tools. Or understood. Yeah. I get that. Because I feel like the more we can understand ourselves and other people, the easier we can adapt situations for ourselves, and then the less we can give ourselves a hard time about, struggling with something or maybe not being able to engage with it in the same way as everyone else is engaging with. How would you suggest it be taught in schools, or how would you suggest that singing teachers would use it in a coaching situations even? Yeah, that is such an interesting question. Okay, the first question with teachers. So I always preface by saying I don't speak for all synesthetes. There's so much variation. So what might help me maybe wouldn't help someone else. But I do think that, so there are various forms of neurodiversity. There's different types of learning challenges and also strengths. And so early on, primary school teachers have a real privileged opportunity to be able to help other kids be more tolerant of kids with maybe neurological differences, just by teaching that it's normal. There's a lot of people in the world with neurological differences. Even if you don't have synesthesia, there's probably a lot of kids who have some attention difficulties or some other type of thing. So just teaching about synesthesia as being, it's just a normal part of the world, I think would be really helpful for kids. And it would not only help the synesthete in the classroom, or synesthetes plural, feel safer and not so weird and just kind of feel validated, but it would also help the other students learn how to be more compassionate human beings. So that would be great.
Yeah, I'm just imagining like how would I try to introduce it? I guess, I don't know, maybe some situation where, I don't know, you'd ask everyone to write down like how would they describe this particular thing, whatever it is, whether it's a song or a story or whatever, and then like highlight how diverse and how interesting it is that everyone can have such different views on it. Maybe something like that, like little exercise like that will kind of normalize it.
That is a great idea. That's a really, really smart. Yeah. You should go tell all the teachers about that.
Oh, yeah.
Really good idea. Yeah, that's perfect. And honestly, like just a simple illustration like that. I can remember in my childhood having really short lessons where I was learning about, we had lessons learning about how people have different skin tones, and that's just part of the world and it's normal. And they were very quick little lessons, but they were impactful and they affected the kids growing up in a positive way. I've heard there's a book called A Mango-Shaped Space. I've never read it, but on TikTok, I guess it's a book about a girl who has synesthesia and she's in eighth grade. And so a lot of kind of the Gen Z generation on our TikTok page will comment and say that they actually are being taught that book in school. So which is really exciting. I don't know how widespread that is, but yeah, there's lots of ways to teach it. So
yeah, I feel TikTok's actually great for getting information firsthand from people who are neurodiverse. I think that's really interesting to like kind of learn about how different people navigate through the world. Because we only know what we kind of read in textbooks and in articles online. It's not the same as hearing firsthand from people who are having these experiences themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And so another thing that I found really interesting on your page was that you analyze different pop songs and different artists and their voices in the songs. So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about some of the artists like that you have analysed, and kind of, are their voices the same in every song, or does it change from song to song? How does that work?
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. So so I've analyzed a few different artists. There's some artists with synesthesia. So Billie Eilish is one. She's talked really openly about her synesthesia. So I've done some analyses of her voice and her singing. And so the way it is for me with voices, there's often like one or two bass colors that I see most frequently with the voice. But then it obviously changes a little bit as the pitches change and the resonance of the voice changes. In music, because there's so many different pitches and so many different changes to resonance and timbre and quality, there's usually a very diverse set of colors, patterns, and textures that I see that aren't consistent across songs, with rare exceptions. So the band Fleetwood Mac, the Stevie Nicks, for whatever reason, her voice across multiple songs, there's a visual that occurs that looks like either like a DNA strand or like a pink ladder. It's like pink and it has little yellow lines like where the rungs are. And it's interesting because it's a reoccurring thing that I see in her music, which isn't common. But yeah, usually it totally changes based on the song. And
like, I don't know if you can do this, but like from a non-synesthete view, would you say the Fleetwood Mac songs are like sound similar texturally from song to song?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because I think that is kind of what it is. With Stevie Nicks, her voice has a really unique quality, as you know, that the tone is really interesting. And so I think that whenever there are like sort of repeating patterns of visuals or textures in music for one singer's voice, they often have kind of a unique texture. So I would say, yeah, Stevie Nicks, maybe that pink ladder keeps showing up because she has such a unique quality of voice, and it's representing that rather than her pitches. Yeah.
Wow, it's so interesting. I'd love to like, I don't know what all the keys the songs are and stuff, but I wonder, like, is it because the songs are in similar keys, or is it similar pitches she's singing? Do you know, I'm very curious to look into that more, like, and see kind of why that might be.
I'm curious too. People like you guys have such great questions, the people I talk to, and I've never thought about my synesthesia from like that analytical point where I've like tested myself to see what the answers are to these questions, but maybe I should, because it's like be an interesting case study of patterns in my synesthesia.
Yeah, and so Billie Eilish, you mentioned Billie Eilish. What would her song "Bad Guy"? What colors do you see in her song?
Oh yeah, so music usually. So for me, it's like it's a moving picture. So it's really dynamic when I hear music. So from one moment to the next, depending on the instrumentation and the chords and the combination of everything together, it will look totally different. So Bad Guy, her music often has a lot of texture to me. That song has moments with the instrumentation. She has a sort of drag sound in the instrumentation, and that's really textured to me. It's like a rough carpet. But then that song has a bunch of different colors. And so part of how my synesthesia works is I have to like be hearing the song actively to see the visuals, because it's an automatic like sensory thing. So off the top of my head, I don't remember the colors, but if you played it for me right now, I could tell you. But yeah, I can say that it's a very textured song, and most of her music is for me. Yeah.
Yes. I think I'm getting like, I don't know, I know this might not be the same thing, but the nearest thing I can compare to is like, you know, when your laptop goes to sleep and that screensaver with all the colours moves around.
Yeah.
That's kind of the nearest thing I kind of picture that when I imagine what synesthesia might be like it changes like a lava lamp or something, like it kind of changes colour, except for you see kind of shapes and textures as well, which makes it even more interesting.
Yeah. Sometimes it is just like that. It's just like a really gentle fade of different images, but sometimes it's like a little more harsh. So there are some songs, especially like rock songs, where the visuals, there's very like bold visuals that sort of pop out of nowhere. Rock music is kind of hard for me to listen to for that reason, because it's very distracting visually. But gentler music tends to have like that fading in and out quality that you were just describing. So
yeah, it doesn't kind of just jump up on you.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's so cool. Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. When I did the dyslexia training, the music and dyslexia training, they actually had a segment of it where they were teaching you about textures, and they had like all these little different what's called samples of fabric, and they were kind of getting us to sing things, and like then showing us like a silky fabric, and then like asking us to change our voice based on what the silky fabric inspired, or like a rough carpet and different things. And I think that's so interesting. It kind of, a lot of what you're saying kind of overlaps with those things, except for you're seeing it in your head as opposed to like using prompts or props.
Right. Yeah. It's like an automatic thing that happens that, yeah, I have no control over it.
But I suppose I'm curious to see like how it could be used. Say if I was like in a coaching situation and say a student was like a little bit flat on the note or something, like could I say, if I said, make it a little bit more yellow, would that make them brighten it up a little bit more? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I thought about that question, and I think it's just like what we were talking about before. The more sensory components that you can integrate, the better people learn. So I would imagine that actually might be a really helpful way to teach a student. The other thing that is interesting is that according to research, according to the American Psychological Association, there is a very high percentage of artists who have synesthesia compared to the general population. So in general, it's like 2 to 4% of the world has some form of synesthesia, but in the artistic community, the estimate is 25%. So that's a lot of people for some reason. So it may be that some of your students, just with that high number, they could have a form of synesthesia. And so one way that I was thinking about that when I was going through voice lessons that would have been helpful is if my teacher had asked me if I did have any color experiences with like higher notes, do you understand that a higher note would sort of like seem a little brighter in color and a lower note would be darker in color? That would have been a language that would have been very helpful for me to get feedback, just like what you were talking about. And it's interesting to like hear you speak too, because it sounds like you have had some synesthesia experiences yourself. So I wonder, partially because, I think that'd be a great idea.
I actually, last week, after I first messaged you, I was chatting to one of my younger students. She's been coming to me for about 2 years now. And I was asking her about how she sees music, as I do like see colour when you see music, or kind of. And first she said no, but then she was like, well, actually, I don't know if this is synesthesia or if it's just her way of painting it, but she was like, well, actually, yeah, if a song sounds kind of sad, then I would say it's blue, and if it's red, then it's angry, and then she had like, if it's yellow, it's happy. Do you know, there was quite like basic colours, but I was like, I wonder if that's like synesthesia, or is that just more of a descriptor thing? I don't know. I was like, it's really cool to like, it was cool to hear that from her.
Yeah, no, that is so interesting. That was like such a great question to ask her. There are some theories that everybody has synesthesia, that because it's just a connection in the brain from one sensory area to another, but that some people, those pathways are just being used more. So like, this is sort of a little bit of a diversion, but it's related to what you were saying. So there have been studies done where on certain substances, people have synesthesia experiences where they see colors, some illicit substances that I'm not recommending you try. But scientists have put those people into an MRI scanner or into a brain scanner, and also put synesthetes, biological synesthetes, into a brain scanner. And they found that their neural pathways looked the same. And so part of the theory is that maybe everybody does have those connections, and you can sort of tap into that a little bit, even if you don't consider yourself a synesthete, but it's just not a very commonly used neural pathway. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. Like, I really do, because like the brain is such a magnificent instrument and we don't know everything about it. And it's like, yeah, I definitely believe that the brain is capable of so much that we just don't know how to tap into. Maybe we have never exercised it enough in that way. And I wonder if people who have synesthesia, like, I wonder if there were certain like occasions or events or kind of memorable moments as a child that kind of helped them develop that skill. I would call it a skill.
I wonder. I'm not sure. There's, I don't know. Because I know for myself, my parents, anything creative, I came from a very musical family. There's a lot of musicians in my family. And so I was just immersed in that really, really early, and sort of had the opportunity to get lost in music and in art. So that's a really interesting question, because I wonder if I formed connections a little differently because of my experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just made me think of another question there I wanted to ask you. But, you know, when you hear a choir singing, what's that like? Is it hard to kind of, does it depend on what they're singing? Does it like, how does that work for you?
It totally depends on who's singing and what they're singing, and the notes that are being used and the quality of the singers' voices. So
would it be similar to like a band, like in a sense that like the voices are just the different instruments and the different colours and textures, as opposed to drums and guitar and keyboards and all that?
Yes, okay, exactly. Okay. Yeah. I will. When you asked that question, though, I did think of one example, because recently I was listening to a choral piece. It was a lot of women, and they had a lot of vibrato, kind of more mature voices, a lot of alto singing. It was really kind of deeper registers. And that, to me, that song, I can't even remember what it was, but it had a lot of round textures to me. So like I had a lot of visuals of like tunnels and circles. And I think somewhere in music, maybe you can correct me on this. Is there a term that has to do with like a round like vocal quality, or is that not, that could just be me misremembering?
There probably is. I can't think off the top of my head, but it's probably, I would say maybe like in classical singing, there's more of a darker, rounder quality to classical voices. Not so much in pop, like slightly darker sound to it.
Yeah, okay.
Sound. I don't know if that's
that totally answers
what you're thinking, or
no, it does, because one thing I was thinking about, I was so excited to come on your podcast, and I was just thinking for the first time about, man, in music, in the music world, there are so many terms that are like sensory terms, sort of like we were talking about earlier, like a bright voice, a round note, a dark note. And I just wonder, like, is it because of the high percentage of artists who have synesthesia that those are so much in the vocabulary of musicians, or what is that? Is that just because we all, I don't know, it's interesting to think about.
It is interesting, and it seems like it's a really hard thing to kind of define in one specific way, because everyone has like experiences, it's slightly different. And I know you're on your TikTok page, you work with another guy who has synesthesia, but it's a slightly different type of synesthesia to you, isn't it?
Yeah,
do you want to maybe explain? Oh, it's your husband. I wasn't sure, so I didn't want to assume.
So, and that's a weird thing. We did not know that the other person had synesthesia until after we were married, because we didn't talk about our synesthesia, just based on like experiences we'd had, slightly negative ones where we'd talked about it and people were like, and just kind of didn't understand what we're talking about. My husband Jack has lexical gustatory synesthesia, which means that when he hears words, he has a taste. So it's not an association where he like thinks, oh, the name Deborah would taste like cherry cola, reminds me of cherry cola. He actually tastes it in his mouth. And so that his form of synesthesia is among the more rare. My type is not very rare in the synesthesia world. But people will ask us all the time, like, how in the world did two people with synesthesia like meet each other and get married? That seems like that would be really unlikely. But yeah, when you know that 2 to 4% of the whole world has it, it isn't so unlikely. But yeah.
Wow.
We both have it.
Interesting.
He has a different type though.
Yeah, and what other are there other types as well? So there's the type where you see colors and textures, and then there's the type where you actually taste, which I didn't realize that's what it was. Yeah. And is there another type? Is there any more?
Oh, yeah. So the researchers have identified 60 different types, but there are like 10 main ones.
I won't ask you to go through them all.
Yeah. Well, one other one that I just think is super interesting, I don't have this, but there's a type called ordinal linguistic personification, or OLP. And that is when people see or think about units of measurement or units of language. So like a number, a letter, a measurement like, in inches or a month, they have an automatic association of a personality with that number, unit of measurement. So like an example is they would say, yeah, the number 5 is really bossy. And it's just, and that one to me, it's hard for me to picture what that would feel like. It's so unique and interesting, but that's another type.
Wow. It's kind of making me understand synesthesia more though. Like even hearing those few descriptors, like it kind of goes back to the brain and like how each individual kind of understands the world around them. And like, it just shows you how complex and amazing the brain really is, doesn't it?
It's amazing. Yeah. When I was doing neuroscience research, I thought I would come away from that thinking that I knew so much about the brain, but I just realized how little I knew the more I dove into it, because there's just so many complexities with the brain. We're barely scratching the surface in our understanding of what the brain can do. Yeah.
Wow. So cool.
Yeah.
And like, even with like all the voice science stuff and the anatomy and all that, like even the science changes all the time. You know, they're always finding new information that kind of can inform your coaching skills. Like, so, you know, it's just going to keep evolving the more we learn about all these things. So
yeah,
that's cool. And so let's go through, out of interest, a couple of like famous singers that, you know, have synesthesia. So I saw online that Lorde has synesthesia.
Yeah.
I think, and she said that she actually like designed one of her albums in the colours that she sees for the songs overall in that album, which is really cool. And there's Billie Eilish.
Mm-hmm.
And who else?
Yeah, so I made a list because there are so many, and I was like, oh, I have to remember of artists who have talked about their synesthesia, because there are a lot. So yeah, Billie Eilish also, she's talked about how when she writes music, she, in her mind, when she first thinks of the piece, she sees colors and textures that she wants the music to look like, and she'll keep rewriting it and rewriting it. I think in one interview, she was like, she wanted the chorus to be a certain shade of yellow, and she just couldn't get it to be that color when she was trying to write it. And so she wouldn't give up until she got it to be that color. So let's see, who else?
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really...
I saw her describe, in a video, she pointed out a light in her room. I don't know if you've seen this video, and she said, she was like, you know, like, if I see this light, let's see if we could like write a song that sounds like the color of this light. Do you know? And I was like, that's so cool.
I hadn't seen that interview. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it was just like a little short clip that I saw online.
Yeah.
And Olivia Rodrigo is another recent one. Is she on your list?
She, I didn't have her on my list, but I wouldn't be surprised if she does. I bet, actually, you know what? That's ringing a bell. I think she has talked about that she does. Billy Joel is another one.
Okay.
Pharrell Williams, Kanye West has multiple types.
I'm not surprised.
No,
I'm not surprised.
He has he talks about multiple types. Stevie Wonder, Mary J. Blige, John Mayer, Frank Ocean, Charlie XCX, Tori Amos, Duke Ellington, Alessia Cara, so many.
Wow, it's so interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they've all talked about synesthesia too. So these are all people who have like opened up and shared that they have it. And another one, this is a speculation, this isn't a certainty, but Pablo Picasso, when we're talking about visual artists, there are records of him, he took piano growing up. And he would tell his teacher that different notes had different colors for him. And so he was kicked out of piano classes because the teacher thought he was wisecracking and like making they didn't know it was synesthesia or what it was. So, you know, thankfully for the rest of the world, then he went into visual art, and that was a lovely gift to the world. But yeah, a lot of artists who have had synesthesia. It's interesting.
It's just given me so many like ideas about like the different things that we can be inspired by, whether it's like creating a painting or writing a song or how we want our voice to sound when we sing. Like, it's just so fascinating. It's like, I'm just looking at my curtain and I'm like, if I was to try and sing the way my curtain, the texture looks on my curtain. And actually, I'm really obsessed with textures. I'm really like, I'm a real texture person. Like if I see something that looks like an interesting texture, I'll want to touch it.
Yeah.
Like one weird thing I did was I was at a gig and there was I was right up the front, and the guy I was singing had like these crocodile skin shoes on, and I was like, "Can I touch your shoes?" And he was like, "Okay." And I just like touched his shoe, and I was like, I feel so intrigued to like touch it and feel what it feels like. Or if some wallpapers have a texture, I'm like, I always want to touch it and see what it feels like.
I love that. That's so funny. I feel like artists, they're so in tune with the sensory experiences of the world that it's not surprising at all to me that, you just have a thing where you love textures. Like, I feel like a lot of artists, they're the part of their brain that deals with sensory experience is just so active, and just seeking sensory stimulation all the time, and ways of perceiving the world. So that's so cool.
So we talked about, the pros of it, and we talked a little bit about the cons of it. So the pros are obviously you can create these wonderful art pictures and artwork, and the cons of it, I suppose, were when you were in school, it kind of was overwhelming and you didn't understand what was going on to an extent. So
yeah,
I feel like there's probably more pros to cons. So what do you think?
I don't know. That's a hard question.
Okay.
I can't imagine not having it because I've always had it. I wouldn't give it up because it's part of my personality. It's part of who I am. But there are definitely things where I still struggle today. So I'm a really extroverted person naturally, but because of my sensory sensitivity, it's hard for me to be in crowds for very long. I just sort of like lose the ability to think clearly, speak clearly, because the visuals are so stimulating. And so sometimes I'll be at a party and I want to stay at the party, but I have to go because my brain won't let me be there any longer. And then I love movies, I love cinema, but oftentimes the audio tracks, the beautiful cinematic audio tracks that are in movies are really visually distracting for me from like the plot and the characters talking. So to watch a movie and really be able to watch it well, I have to have subtitles. And so that's fine at home, but then in movie theater, there often aren't subtitles. And so I might lose some of the plot because of the music. So pros and cons for sure.
Wow. And finally, what color is my voice?
Oh yeah.
What color do you think my voice is?
Your voice has a few different colors. So the bass tone, you have a really lovely like a bright pink. There's different shades of pink, and the one I'm thinking of, it's a rose. It's like a vibrant, so it's not a pastel pink, but it's a really vibrant pink. And that's sort of a base color that I see. But then in your lower registers, it dips down into a violet, like sort of a brightish purple violet, almost like a periwinkle.
Okay.
And then your voice also has a texture to me. So it's a really soft voice in the sense where it almost feels like a feather of like a really soft bird, or like just something where there's some strands, but it's really smooth and soft. So yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. I was dying to ask you that. I think everyone is like, tell me mine.
Oh, yeah. No, not all voices have a texture to me. So when one does, those are usually the voices that are the most like pleasing for me to listen to. And right away when you started speaking, I thought, oh yay, her voice has such a nice texture. This is going to be so pleasant to talk.
Imagine like my voice was just really distracting and like we had to do this and you were just like, we can't do this.
That happens sometimes when people have glottal fry, which when you go into this, like, so working with my patients, that was hard sometimes because a lot of them would have glottal fry. Yeah. And it would be a little harder to focus when I was talking to them. But yeah, all voices are beautiful, I think. I think voices are lovely. So.
And what color is your voice?
My voice, this is odd. When I speak, as I'm speaking, I don't see anything. And so I was talking to a linguist about why that might be. He has some theories. But when I hear my voice in an audio recording, so played back on TikTok, it has a strong base color of yellow, like a pastel yellow. So as I'm talking, I don't see anything.
I wonder, I'm just brainstorming here, but I wonder if that's because you're feeling it.
Oh,
but when you listen to other, so your brain is like connecting your voice with you feeling it, as opposed to when you listen to people, you're not feeling their voice. I wonder if it's something like that.
I think that's a really good idea, or a really good guess, though. I bet that's part of it.
I'm just so fascinated with the brain in general.
Oh, me too.
But anyway.
I feel like we're friends already. I could talk to you for a long time about voices in the brain and art. Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, I've only been on TikTok a couple of months, and I only follow like a handful of pages, and you're one of them, and I've really enjoyed what you're putting up, and it's really interesting to look at the paintings of like songs that I know and see kind of what way you're seeing them, and yeah, I've really enjoyed it, so keep it up.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You're doing great. How many followers do you have now on TikTok?
I think it's like 400,000. Which is a surprise. Neither Jack or I thought people would be this interested, but we're happy to share about it. So
yeah. And when did you start TikToking?
I think it was in February, like the end of February.
you haven't even been doing it that long, but you've got like quite a bit of a following. And have you found, just out of curiosity, have you found that that TikTok has helped you reach like more of an audience for your artwork and your business, that side of thing? Does it link in well with that?
For sure. I think the one thing that I love collaborating with people. So the one thing I think is the coolest is that some musicians have found my art through TikTok exposure, and so have asked about painting some of their music to use as like album artwork, or to make a music video out of kind of what I see for their song. And that's like a dream. If I could do one thing in the world on like a bucket list, it's to collaborate with musicians and show them what their music looks like to me. That's like my favorite thing to do. So,
well, I might give you a shout when I'm looking to design my next album cover.
I'd be happy to do it. It'd be so fun.